I want to know if this had anything to do with maybe you not saying anything. So I want to read a part that said, there was a lot of good in my dad. He had a big heart, and when he was sober, would do anything for anyone. When he was sober, he did all the sports, all the fun stuff with me, fishing, riding our dune buggy in the quarries, playing croquet in the yard, singing, teaching me how to mow the lawn and how to make my grandmother's favorite recipes. I clung so desperately to those moments, no matter how brief, and prayed so hard that it could stay that way forever. It never did. So did that play into any part of maybe why you didn't say anything? Because you were always, there was a little piece of that still there and you were trying to hold on to that?
I think so. I think I never really thought about it like that. But yeah, I guess so, because I didn't want anything to happen to my dad either.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to get away from him in a sense, like just so that we felt safe, but I didn't want to lose him completely either. So I was scared of what would happen to him if anybody found out. And I didn't want to bring shame just in general to our family, because I did have hope, for a while.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to the next thing that's kind of related to that. And I've seen this in my family, just not to that extent. And it's about your dad's family. And instead of reading, the part, it basically breaks down saying, you knew they knew. Mm-hmm. And they let on, like, either they didn't want to say anything or they didn't know. Was there ever any admission later on from them about that?
My dad's sisters have told me they knew what was going on, but my dad's youngest sister, she was a lot younger, only 11 years older than me, so she didn't know what to do, and she was dealing with her own stuff, and so was my other aunt. They had their own issues in their family, and they didn't know how to help themselves. There's no way that they were going to figure out how to help us. So even while they knew, it was like, what do we do? Mm-hmm. And I think it was just kind of one of those things where they're adults and they're going to have to figure it out. They knew taking me out of the home wasn't going to work. They weren't in a position to be able to take me into their family. So, and it wouldn't have been any better there. So I think we were just everybody was probably kind of at a loss as to, we know this is happening, but nothing we can do about it.
Did they treat him any differently if you're looking through the eyes of, okay, I know they know what's going on. Did they treat him any differently?
Not that I remember. He was always very well loved by everybody. I mean, really, like I talk about it in the book, how he just had this persona that was so accepting, and he had this charisma that everybody just loved him and flocked to him. Mm-hmm. And even his siblings who knew how he really was, but they all gave so much grace to each other because they knew what they had went through. They knew that they had struggled with things in their childhood and they were all fighting their own demons. Mm-hmm. So they didn't treat him poorly because they were struggling with things themselves.
Yeah. And I can imagine too, just like you said, on top of that, nobody knows the extent of what may be going on. Mm-hmm. If you see the surface things, you can assume things are worse, but then sometimes they're not. So I guess as the family, it is kind of hard, not that, I want to give anybody a pass, because when you see something like that, we've learned in this culture nowadays, you need to speak up because things may be, 1,000 times worse than what we realize.
Yeah.
One of the things that I believe we go to the chapter called Nighttime. I can't imagine this being somebody's every day. Mm. I'm going to read this page. And I just want everybody listening to take into account, this just isn't this isn't a one-off thing. This is an experience that you were living through. And again, not that boys don't go through this too, because they do. I just can't imagine for a young girl living with what you were living with. and dealing with this on a daily basis. Okay, it says most children will follow their mommies around the house, never letting them go to the bathroom by themselves or have a moment of peace just because they want to be near them. I had a very different reason for following my mom wherever she went. I couldn't let her out of my sight for fear that Dad might hurt her if she went near him. But if I was by her side, I felt like he was less likely to lash out at her. As abusive as he was to her, he seemed to be a little more careful when I was around her, or near her. He'd shove me out of the way and slap me occasionally, but I never considered it any more than discipline. He'd spank me with his hand, a belt, or with a switch from a tree that he'd make me cut down and bring in myself. The scariest part was at bedtime. I had to go to my own room. Mom wanted to stay close. I can't read this. We'll edit that out. Mom wanted to close the door, but every night I begged her to leave it open. She would compromise and leave it cracked a little. I just needed to be able to hear my parents because I thought if I could detect that something that was about to happen, I could be prepared and intervene right away. I know that that's got to be tough even now to go back on, but can you kind of just explain the mindset, what that's like dealing with every night?
Yeah, it was constantly in my mind. It was something that I had to always be hyper focused on, or I felt like I needed to always be hyper focused on. And I don't think there was ever a time that I let my guard down, that I could just relax and be a kid when my dad was around. And I talk about in there the times where he went away for work or he was gone during the day or whatever. Those were the only times that I felt at peace, but I knew he was going to come home at some point, and it was just when, So I think I allowed myself to relax a little bit in those moments when he wasn't there and try not to think so much about the what ifs when he does come back. But as soon as I knew when he was coming back, it was just always at the forefront of my mind, planning my next move, planning my next reaction, planning how do I help my mom if this happens, or how do I get us out of here? Do I need to call 911? Where's the phone? What's my direct path? Like, I was planning a way out all the time. And I know my mom was too. My mom was always thinking about when or how she could escape if it got to the point where things got so violent that she needed to.
Did that become normal?
It was normal. It was normal. That was my life. And having children myself now, I couldn't imagine ever putting them through something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I have 7-year-old twin girls, and when I tuck them in at night, I make sure every night to let them know that I love them. And I am so happy that they can go to bed feeling peace. And there's no fear there. And I just feel blessed that God has brought me out of that my girls never have to experience something like that. Because that was the one thing when I had kids, I always promised myself and them that they would never fear for anything, that they would always have safety and security.
Let's take a second. We're going to go to the next chapter. And this kind of parlays off of what we were just talking about. And this is just chapter 4. It says the really bad fights. That is one of the things that I know a lot of children go through when they see their parents fighting. You don't know the outcome. You don't know how bad it's going to get. And especially in your case, you have seen outcomes that you were concerned about would even get worse and what they might lead to. One of the things in this chapter, it brought to light a mindset that we normally wouldn't be in and people don't normally think about. So I want to read a little bit in here, and just if you would explain, we pretty much know how you got there, but where you were in that time and what you were thinking. And how old were you in this portion? Were you weren't even a teenager yet, right?
No. I would have been younger, probably 7, 8. I talk about in there how my memories kind of blur together and I can never quite remember where I was, but I think my earliest memory is at 4. I was 4 years old, and some of that is probably during this time.
Yeah, and that's why I pretty much thought that was where it is, where the weight of that for what I'm about to read is remarkable to have to deal with as a child. So it starts out, one night I actually thought he might disappear. My mom and I held our breath. Hopefully it would happen this time. It was the middle of the night. I woke up to screaming and yelling. I made my way quietly down the hallway to the kitchen, ready to protect my mom. What I saw made me stop dead in my tracks at the end of the hallway, hiding in the shadows, praying prayers that a little girl should never have to pray, praying that God would take my dad away from us forever. They both stood by the kitchen sink, facing each other. He was screaming one threat after another at her. Then he reached into the silverware drawer, pulled out the biggest knife I had ever seen, and pointed it at my mom. I thought for sure he was going to kill her, and just as I was about to scream as loud as I could to stop him, he turned the knife on himself. All I could do was watch in shock. My mom, shaking and crying, pleaded with him, "Please don't do this here, she's watching." He screamed back, "She doesn't care about me and neither do you, so I might as well just kill myself. Then maybe you'll both be happy." Instead of trying to stop him, she begged him, "If you're going to do it, please just go out to the shed." As I stood there trembling, holding my breath, all I could think of was, "Please just do it so we can finally be free." I can't imagine the weight of a young child to have that mindset. Was that something that at this point was also a nightly occurrence or thought? I know this point got to that violent point that I'm assuming didn't happen every night. Mm-hmm. But to immediately go to that thought of just do it so we can be rid of you at that young age. Can you kind of talk us through that?
Yeah, I think I was probably about 7 during that time. The really bad fights, as I call them in the book, didn't happen every night, but they happened often enough throughout my childhood that the fear of them happening was always there, mm-hmm. because I never knew when something like that was going to happen. And we talked earlier about me wanting to kind of protect my dad even, and I didn't want anything bad to happen to him, and I wanted to hold on to that hope that he might possibly be the good father that I needed him to be at some point. Mm-hmm. But it was times like this when I was like, in my mind, I just felt like that's the only way out. And sadly, I think my mom and I thought that way a lot growing up. And even, up until the point that he did pass, and we felt relief when he finally did, because we knew we didn't have to be scared anymore. We didn't have to live that way anymore. So yeah, I guess the thought process, mind-blowing. And again, I put myself where my girls are because I was probably about their age right now. And I don't ever want them to have to think thoughts like that. I want them to think, sunshine and rainbows. I want them to think about all the little things that they think about, and just being kids, because I never got that.
And the hard part, like I said, I think the weight is because of, even just using your girls, for example, if you were to have a fight in your house now, to them it would be scary. It would be something out of the ordinary. That thought wouldn't even come into their mind.
No.
For you, the circumstances that led up to that thought was just building on top of each other that you came to that conclusion. And it's just to have that mindset at that young age had to be terrifying. But again, I know you were, and it says in here, you know, you were trying to protect your mom. That was your first thing.
Yeah.
But just the fact that it gives you an idea of the length of time and the amount of things you were dealing with to finally get to that point. This isn't like something that comes to your mind naturally. This is something that comes to, okay, I've had enough.
Yeah.
I've been just hurt and just I can't deal with it anymore.
Yeah. Well, and it's, you know, you say to finally get to that point, and I was only 7-ish, you know, like the years building up to that were minuscule, 3-4 years maybe from the time that I started remembering, or I do remember the fights up until that point. So much had happened in just a short period of time that got me to that point where I needed it to be over.
Mm-hmm.
And then still had to live through 20 more years of it, 10 more. I don't know how long really till he had passed, but I think I was 20. So yeah, 13 years that we still had to live through it past that point.
Wow. And that just goes to show to what we're going to get into later, like the mindset of where you were at that time. Yeah. And the decisions that you ended up making because of being in that mindset. One of the next parts was there's a lot in here about your mom. But I want to stay focused right now on your dad, because there's a shift coming that we talked about a little bit earlier.